नमस्ते सबैजनालाई। टिपिएस डेजिग्नेसनको 1 महिनाभन्दा बढी भइसक्दा पनि धेरैलाई कन्फ्युजन रहेको छ यस बारेमा, especially folks with H1 and F1 status. So, Nepalese Student Association here at Boise State University met with immigration attorney Ms. Angela Levesque and asked her a bunch of questions regarding TPS and its future implication. We sincerely hope that after watching this video, you'll be able to make an informed decision regarding TPS. Thank you for watching, and we apologize for poor video quality. Start whenever you're ready.
All right, I guess I can start then. So obviously we're talking about TPS, specifically the new designation protocol, and throughout the whole presentation I'm going to basically ask you to keep referring back to uscis.gov, because things can change. These can change, decisions can change, the extensions can change. So that's going to be always your major resource as for the updated information. But currently, they've designated TPS for Nepal, and that's basically a protection for people of this country so that you don't have to go back and you can stay here in the United States for that time period. Fortunately, with this designation, you can also obtain work authorization. So I'm not going to go through these, all of this because you are intelligent people. You can read it on your own. You've obviously done already a lot of research. I'm going to highlight things that I think are very important. And then we'll go through your questions at the end. And then if any others come up, we'll address those. So the initial registration period is going to be from the announcement June 24th of 2015 until December 21st, 2015. That means that you have to register during this time period. They've not talked about any late registrations yet, so focus on that, do it before that time period ends. So of course you know where to file, it says there. Now when you file the registration or the TPS, I'm just going through in order of where this appears. You're going to get an initial review. That is not an approval. That's something that's important to note. So they'll give you a notice initially saying, hi, we've gotten your application. And then after they do an initial review, and if they see everything seems to be in order, they'll give you what's called a prima facie determination, which means basically, I think we're going to approve you. We just need to kind of do a second review and be sure. So with that prima facie determination, that's what gives you the basis for the EAD. So they'll give you an EAD as well.
Work permit.
A work permit, and employment authorization document, work permit. Yeah, if I speak in the immigration jargon, stop me, because it's just very common with me, I apologize. But know that after that, you will get a final determination on the eligibility. They could, for some reason or another, we can go through that later, decide not to give that to you. They could, and at that point, that employment authorization document will become invalid. But most likely, they'll just approve you, and you'll continue to have the TPS, and you'll be protected the whole time during the application period. TPS benefits, obviously you cannot be removed. Whenever they say removed, it means deported. You can't be deported from the United States based on having nothing else. Let's say you don't have an F1 student anymore, but you have TPS, that protects you. You can be removed or deported for other reasons, and we'll go into that. In other words, you can lose that TPS status or your F1 status, but that's extraneous. Obviously, you'll get that employment authorization document. The other thing is the travel authorization. This is very important. You have the right to apply for travel, but the TPS alone does not grant you that authorization to travel. You have to actually apply through another application. It's the I-131, I put it down here, to travel. And you have to wait until you get authorization before you leave. So a lot of people are like, all right, cool, we'll file the advanced parole, it's called, and then they leave. Now you've just abandoned your status. You have to wait until you get the approval notice. Then you can see when you can travel. It'll be valid from X date until X date. You can travel within that time period, okay? And we'll talk about the how long you can travel in a bit, because that was one of the questions.
So it's important for people to understand if they apply for and receive TPS status, they're mostly unable to leave the US
Correct.
unless they apply for permission to travel.
Right, that is an additional permission. The only thing that TPS opens up is the eligibility to apply, not the actual right to leave. So ask for the right to leave before you leave
So we're talking about travel to any country or just home country?
to any country. You want to go to Mexico for a little bit? Get TPS.
Basically, if you wanna leave the US.
Yeah.
Because if you leave, we consider, oh, you abandoned this TPS thing, you don't want it, you don't need it.
Right.
All right, that was very important. Okay, so TPS obviously is temporary. I was looking through the regulations and the statute and case law and other attorneys' experiences, and I have found nothing except for immigration's one line in this, online form, which is not like really basis in the law, to say that TPS is not a lawful status. That's what I knew in my gut, but I don't like presenting without verifying. And I can't find anywhere that says that even though, so TPS is not a legal status. All right, so this is a weird, important distinction. TPS is temporary protected status, right? It has that word status in there. One assumes, incorrectly in this case, that status means that it's a lawful status. It's actually not. So lawful status is, I'm guessing all of you are on probably an F1. You have a lawful immigrant or non-immigrant status that allows you to stay here in the United States, an F1 student status. There are different things that allow people to stay in the United States that are not statuses. For example, you've heard of deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA, what lots of undocumented children are applying for. They're getting a temporary protection to stay in the United States, a deferred action, technically. So TPS is more akin to that than it is to a lawful status. It's an important designation because if you have TPS, I think that you can argue that you can also keep your F1 student status at the same time. That's the important distinction. So you can have a valid I-20 and decide, you know what, I'm gonna use my OPT EAD, Employment Authorization Document, instead of the OPT the EAD for the TPS. See, too many words. You understand, you got the lingo here. I actually don't know why one would do that. We'll talk about that in one of the questions that's asked, but important distinction. Let's say if you know of a Nepalese national who is not in lawful status, came here on a student or a tourist visa, fell out of status, and is not in status right now, they can still apply for this TPS and they will get this temporary protected status. They will get a work authorization, things will look nice, they'll be very happy, but they technically don't have a lawful status, and when that TPS ends, if it ends, they go back to not having lawful status. And so you ideally would have to do something with their status while they're on TPS to help them out. So not necessarily pertaining to you guys directly, but you might know someone, etc. I thought that was an important point to make. All right, so I think if you talked about this in the questions, the one thing that TPS does allow you to do, to continue to do, is to apply for a change of status or adjustment of status. Change of status means you're going to change your status to a temporary, or rather a non-immigrant status, so like a work visa or it's basically, or a religious visa, something that's not a green card. Adjustment of status means that you can adjust or become a permanent resident. So if you're on TPS, you are allowed to do that, but we do have to consider a lot of other factors. So let's say, for example, that Nepalese national who was undocumented before, we'd have to consider other factors. They might not be able to adjust if they're on TPS. You guys, if you're on F1 right now or a student visa, lawful status, have maintained your status, have no crimes, get on TPS. Let's say you forget about the F1, and then you get Micron who says, you know what, I want to hire you. I want to sponsor you for an H-1B. Or you get married to a U.S. citizen. You can change or adjust your status from the TPS to the H-1B or to permanent residency. Okay, so that's the nice thing about TPS. It allows for that, and that's built into the law and the regs.
So while on TPS, the guy has to maintain his whatever visa he had before So he has to take the both in parallel, or?
Beforehand, so before the TPS, before you had TPS,
Mhm.
you had to have been eligible for a visa, so maintained your status or have some exception, applies to you if you forgot to maintain your status. Because there's so many things that I could tell you that immigration law is just not going to be enough in like half an hour, but be eligible for a visa, no crimes, et cetera, et cetera. But then while you're on TPS, if you were fined beforehand, you will still be fined even if your I-20 expires and you just decide not to pursue the I-20. You decide to just stay on TPS. And in that period, you find someone who will sponsor you, or you get married, or you can self-sponsor, then you can do that even though the prior status is no longer current. Does that make sense? And please stop me if I'm going.
I think the large majority of these students will probably continue their studies. If they're on TPS and they decide, I'm not gonna follow the F1 regulations anymore, and then they don't end up getting another status somehow. What happens when TPS ends and they say, okay, now I wanna follow F1 rules again? What would we do? How would that work?
There have been attorney experiences that have said no problem, because if you're working on a TPS employment authorization document, you're still complying within the law. You are not working unauthorized, right? And if you still have the valid I-20, you're fine. And again, even if you didn't have the valid I-20 and you don't have anything during that TPS to back you up, you just have the TPS, you can go ahead and go back to the F1. It's just considered like a change of status. So you
So
have
they'd
to
have to
file
apply
all
for
over.
F1 all over again.
Yeah.
If they don't maintain status while they're on TPS.
Correct.
If they don't maintain F1 status while they're on TPS.
Correct.
And what about a student who graduates while he is in TPS? How can he maintain his F1?
Say that again if someone.
I mean, if someone graduates while he is in TPS, he doesn't have any classes to take. So once TPS ends, what happens to him?
I hope he's got something to cover him.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the risk. So for example, if you graduated in May, you have your OPT, it's only gonna last a certain amount of time.
Right.
This TPS might last longer. So you might switch to this TPS, and in that meanwhile, just keep trying for an H-1B or what, and any other type of visa. That would still be true if you had an OPT,
Right.
an OPT EAD. You still have to find an employer. The cool thing is that the EAD for the TPS opens your world a lot more. You're not stuck to one employer. And are you stuck to one employer with OPT EAD?
No, but you're stuck to, it has to be in your,
Field of
Yeah.
study, you're right, there you go. So
H1.
this one, you can work at McDonald's if you want to. I just don't think you guys will, but,
so if TPS ends and they don't have any of this other stuff going on, they have a certain amount of time to leave the country, I assume? Okay, TPS is over, you have 60 days to leave the country or whatever it is.
Well, the regulations in the law state that if once TPS is over, so they'll either not extend it or they'll tell you we're ending it early. That's more unusual, but they could, in the regulations, it does say that they have to provide 60 days notice if they're gonna end it early, so you'll know. That's why I say keep referring to USCA statute. If it's ending and they're not renewing it, you'll know because they have to review it, I think it is 60 days before the end of it to determine whether they're going to renew it or not, okay? So you'll have some sort of advance notice. Gosh, they're not gonna renew it. That being said, so obviously the ideal situation is to leave or resolve your status some other way before that time period, because it's over, done immediately. Once that date hits, they say TPS is gone, you're done. Now, even if you're here without lawful status for a day or 2 days, there is technically under section 212 of the immigration law, 212A9B, there is no penalty to overstaying or for unlawful presence so long as it's less than 6 months. I still think that any period of unlawful presence can be used against you when you're applying for some sort of visa, let's say in your home country, and it comes down to discretion. So, the individual at the consulate could say, you know what, for some reason I see that you had TPS but overstayed by 5.5 months. There's no penalty, but I think that was just you trying to game the system. So I'm going to deny you this, F1 visa that you're applying for again. I think that that's more unlikely, and that's why I say, you should leave as soon as you can, but know that really there is no penalty for unlawful presence unless you've surpassed 6 months, okay, under the law.
So when you say change in status, does that mean something that we can apply while you're here, or do we have to go back to the country and
Change of
apply?
status and adjustment of status means applying within the United States.
Okay.
If you go back to your home country, that's just consular processing, that's just the term that we use, and you can still do that.
Okay, I have 2 questions. So the first one is, if you apply for TPS and you decide to leave the country, is that when can you do that?
And I don't know if you were here when we talked about getting.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. There is a mechanism in order for one who has TPS to leave the country, it could be New Mexico or to your home country, wherever. But you have to apply for it before you leave, and you have to get the approval before you leave. It's called advance parole, form I-131. I think it's like $445. But you have to apply for that and get that approval beforehand. Because if you leave before it's approved, or say, oh, I'll just apply for it from abroad, you're stuck. There are places, there are circumstances where you can apply for it abroad. This is not one of them. And that's the confusing part. The form, immigration loves doing this. They use one form for different types of applications. So you're looking at it and you're like, what the heck? This says that I can apply for it from abroad. Not for
How long
you.
will it take though for you to get the approval?
Great question. I've done several I-131s in the recent past, and it's been anywhere from 2 months to 6 months, and one that's pending for more than 6 months at this point. It's really going to depend. They do background checks when you apply for anything with immigration law. I think the one that's pending is because of the guy's background.
But there's no way of expediting
You can try and say it's an emergency situation, especially if it is a humanitarian emergency situation. But often I found that it falls on deaf ears. I like if it is an emergency situation, I like providing evidence of that. So doctor's notes, showing grandma's really sick or something of that nature.
And then the second question, I know that I'm just looking at TPS and thinking like, what
And those are our
Yeah,
questions.
okay, so, and it happened in 2011, right? And then the expiration date kept like extending.
Yeah.
Up until now, it just shows like January 27th.
It's for a different
2016.
country. For which
Haiti.
For
Oh,
Haiti,
Haiti,
yeah. So I'm just saying, like, what are the conditions that will extend for Nepal as well? Right now, it just said until 2016.
It is dependent on the government and on the person, the group deciding. I mean, it's going to be the Attorney General and, according to law, Attorney General, the executive branch. And they do assess it beforehand. I think I said that the regulation said 60 days. They make an assessment and they make that announcement if they're going to extend it or not. But they do take those factors and they just don't, it's just discretionary. And it can be extended 6 months, it can be extended 12 months or 18 months at the most.
Okay, sorry, last question. And then you can apply for TPS at home on your own, right? But what would be the difference if I apply through like a lawyer? To say,
TPS, these forms it's not rocket science.
right.
Whether you can apply or not is really the question, I always say. So I know you guys are students, so it's not like you guys are, can hire a lawyer for everything. But when it comes to your status, take it very seriously. At least for each one of you, you should, if you plan to apply for TPS, get a consultation. Because the question is, can you apply? What if, that conviction that was really petty when I was a kid is going to affect me? Or, I was at a status for X amount of dates, but for some reason immigration gave me status again. Is this going to affect me? Those are the kinds of things that I look at. Just to be sure, or as sure as possible, because we can never guarantee anything, especially with immigration. To be that, to have, you put your best foot forward. But in terms of applying, it's not difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we're more experienced at doing it because we've done more TPS applications. That being said, in Idaho, I've not done many because it's just not come up. I have practice in other areas, so I've done some in the past.
So right now, do we know TPS is gonna last a certain amount of time?
Until December of 2016.
Oh, okay.
If not extended.
If it's not extended, yeah. So we shall see what they say. Go ahead.
I had a question about the 6 months, no penalty period you talked about. Because 2 months might not be enough time for people to go back to F1 or any other status. Students might think, I'll just wait for another, like a fall semester or like spring, right? So can you give more explanation into this 6 month window?
So the 6 month time period, I would Google INA, which is the Immigration and Nationality Act, as you guys are very smart, 212A9B. That is the section of the law under which this appears. It says, paraphrasing, because I know the sections, but I don't memorize them. If someone is present in the United States without lawful status for 6 months or more, and the person leaves, at that point the person has a penalty of 3 years from adjusting or getting a new sort of status. So then at that point you have a penalty. If you surpass 1 year, then the penalty is 10 years. So don't go past a year, that's pretty bad. Past 6 months is pretty bad. But this is under the law. This is the black and white. This is what the penalty is. Whenever you're applying for immigrant visa or a non-immigrant visa, whatever type of visa, most often there's an element of discretion. In other words, the immigration agency and the U.S. government in general, they say, you know, we can make the determination on who we want to allow into our borders and who we want to stay. So if they see that someone is kind of abusing the system, then they might say, we don't want your kind here, right? So we don't want someone who's just gaming the system. Again, I think it's going to be unlikely that they're going to use that element of discretion against you because they'd have to somehow presume that you did it, you know, nefariously, which I don't think is often the case. It's just like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I need to figure something out, and that I think is okay. The other thing that I think you need to know, I'm talking about, you know, the penalties to, you know, maybe leaving, and then at that point, when you're outside of the country, applying to come back in. Often, when you are applying for an immigrant or non-immigrant visa, non-immigrant, so not green card, you have to show maintenance of status. And if you have a gap, they could say, you know what, you didn't maintain your status. But I can tell you, I've done cases where the person did not maintain their status, didn't go over 6 months, and we've got them a new e-visa, in this one case, an investor visa.
I'm wondering, so if you get TPS and you're an F1 student, if you stop going to school, our only option is to terminate your I-20 in the database. So I'm thinking that when TPS ends or you're ready to become an F1 again, if you're staying in the US, you'll have to apply for reinstatement of your F1 status. That takes a little while. You come to us, we create a brand new I-20 record, you fill out the immigration form and pay a couple $100 and mail in a letter of why you fell out of status and why you want your status back. This is gonna be pretty clear cut. You know, I applied for TPS and I was approved, and so you haven't really done anything illegal. But you'll still probably have to go through that process, which could take a few months. But actually, as soon as you apply for reinstatement, you're supposed to start acting like an F1 student, meaning you need to be enrolled full-time now, blah, blah, blah. So it probably would be relatively seamless. And then, of course, the other way is you're going home for a visit anyway, just go to the US Embassy, get the I-20 from us, go to the US Embassy, get the F1 visa again that way. You'll have to think ahead, maybe.
Yeah, no, I agree. Always, as soon as you can get some other status that's more definite, do it. The H-1Bs are tricky, but I will come to that point in a second. You reminded me of something very important. If you're staying here and you're, let's say, you know, you your TPS ended and immediately you file the H-1B darn it, it's still pending. But you filed it as soon as or just before your TPS ended. According to immigration, if you have an application that's pending, you're covered. That does not count as unlawful presence. Now, if your application is denied, guess what? All that time period counts as unlawful presence, so it's kind of weird. Just a caveat there.
Wow.
The H-1B thing is important, and I probably am talking out of turn, but this is important. It's so hard getting H-1B these days, all right? There are only 65,000 for people in four-year degree, 35,000 for master's degrees. Right now, we have so many people applying, and there's only one time a year you can apply, April 1st. You guys probably don't know this. It's worth saying though, if you are lucky enough to be in that first group that they say, all right, cutoff date, you're in the group. Because more than 65 or 35,000 people apply, they're gonna do a lottery of those people. Now, this is not the diversity lottery, it's a different lottery, okay? And they'll just pick, however many visas, and then they'll adjudicate those. If you're not lucky enough, you might have the perfect H-1B but not be picked, and then you're stuck. The cool thing with TPS is that, you know what, you've got TPS. I'll just try next year. So if you can, if you're still, if you just graduated, you might want to think about doing this as soon as possible and kind of getting several bites at the apple with the H-1B. If the H-1B is the one that you want to do, because there might be a better visa for you. An L1, an E, I don't know if there's an E for Nepal, I have to look, but
What if you already have an H-1B?
if you already have an H-1B,
Yeah.
oh, so that's weird, interesting.
Like, will you, like when TPS ends and you want to go back to your H-1B?
Well, here's the thing, because TPS is not a status,
The both can go
getting
together?
TPS does not mean that your H-1B is over,
Okay,
right? But if you stop working for the H-1B employer, that means your H-1B is over,
okay.
right? So that case, you might not apply for the H-1B or for the TPS EAD because you want to stick with your H-1B employer so they can sponsor you, right?
Mhm.
So I would say it's very likely that you have a lawyer for the perm. If you're doing perm, you know what I'm talking about? Okay. More things that I thought I was talking about. Let's see, talk to the attorney and see how likely perm is. Because TPS could be kind of like this measure that would help you in the short run if your employer, jumps ship
Yeah,
on you.
that's what
or-
I'm saying. Like they're starting, like my employer, starting perm for me since September. They're saying it'll take a year.
Yeah.
To get the application through, and then when that time, many things can happen. The company might, freeze sponsorships.
Yeah.
In that case, TPS can be handy.
Exactly, and you might just find another employer.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah.
you're saying is H-1B and TPS, they can go together, and I can have like a net safety net.
that's the part that I wasn't sure of that I had to look up. Because I know in my gut TPS is not a lawful status, but I can't tell you, oh, my gut says that. I mean, that's not a basis in the law. I can't write that on a brief. And I looked everywhere to see where it says in the law that TPS is not a lawful status. And all the evidence around it says it's not a lawful status because, whatever, all the evidence around it. But I have found experiences directly from attorneys saying that they have done exactly that. They have had TPS at the same time they've had actually an F1. It's for a law student, which is kind of cool. But so that's confirmation for me, but it's disturbing to me that I can't find it in the law, but immigration's never certain. It's an uncertain science.
I had a quick question on the same note. A guy in F1 wins a H1 lottery and he's in H1 now while he's in TPS. Doesn't that mean he has 2 EAD? Because now he goes to H1, he already had EAD from TPS.
Right. So just stop working for other employers, only work for your H-1B employer, and that way you're working for the H-1B. H-1B doesn't have an EAD, mind you. The
Okay.
visa status itself is your authorization for employment.
Okay. So that's different from OPT, like we have EAD.
OPT, you've got a nice little card that says
Okay.
EAD. H-1B, you have this big piece of paper with the I-94 on it
Okay.
that basically says you are an H-1B, and that alone gives you status without having to have an EAD.
So if you leave the company or you want to work somewhere else, then you can use the TPS EAD.
Exactly.
So with TPS, you can work, for multiple companies or jobs?
You can have 5 jobs if you can stand it, yeah.
It's like OPT.
It's totally open, and it doesn't have to be in your field of study.
And one question in the same note would be, for example, I don't need TPS because I have the, let's say, H1B by December 2016. But if extension, extension was approved, will be approved, then I may want TPS.
Right.
Then should I apply from like now, or I can just apply at the time when it's extended?
You know, there would have to be authorization for late registration.
Uh-huh.
There is no such thing yet, so I can't tell you yes. I suggest if you think that you're gonna use it now. Because it's not gonna adversely affect you, just in your pocket.
What's the processing time, do we know?
No, I don't know, it could, yeah, it's gonna depend on, I didn't look, I should have looked, but if you look at www.uscis.gov processing times and look for 821, that form, then you'll see what they're currently processing at. It's gonna depend on that date and time, that can fluctuate. They can say, you know what, this is taking 5 months. With TPS now, it could be taking a lot longer than normal because there are more people applying for Nepal. It depends on them, so I wish I had checked on that, I'm sorry.
Do you know what's the amount of time it takes to get EAD once applied for TPS?
So you have to get your prima facie determination, and from my understanding is they get your prima facie determination and they will manufacture your EAD at that point, so it could be 3 weeks or so from then. But, don't quote me on that. If they don't give it to you within 90 days, I would say you can go to immigration and complain.
Can we apply for the EAD? We apply for TPS within the registration deadline, but can we apply for EAD after the deadline?
Yeah, I would
It's right
argue.
here, I was reading this, I
Okay.
was just gonna comment on that to register for TPS, you must file both forms. Form I-821 and the I-765, which is the EAD form.
Mhm.
And so it's important to know there's gonna be fees with both of these. It's $380 for the EAD form, I don't know how much it is.
It's like 50 or something,
You must file for EAD?
but you have to, so this is important, and the other page will show this. You have to file both forms, 821 and the 765. 821 is for TPS, 765 is for EAD. But you don't have to ask for the EAD. Weirdness, right? It just don't check off the boxes. It says there in this note somewhere that you're asking for an EAD
Then you don't have to pay.
and don't pay,
And choose.
which is cool.
Okay.
But you still have to file a form. I think frankly, if someone is like looking, okay, is this form here, this form here? Yes. If not, then they're gonna be like, no, denied. So just file a form,
Even if we don't want it.
even if you don't want it. But follow the instructions on here when you don't want the EAD.
And when we want it in the future, what do
Then
we
you
do?
file a 765 again, based on, and send a copy of your approval or your TPS.
So right now I'm F1 visa. So I'm graduating in May, so we few students are graduating. So what if I get the TPS status now and apply for EAD? And for the 1 year, let's say I work on EAD of TPS, but I'm still maintaining my status of F1 because I go to school. Then in May, we figure that TPS is not gonna be extended more than December. So 6 months is not enough to get H1B. So then what if I decide, okay, I'll apply OPT? Is that possible?
If you still have a valid I-20.
And then if I apply OPT and by chance if the TPS is extended, then I wanna, let's say I don't want OPT anymore and I wanna go back to the TPS EAD.
If you still have
That's possible?
TPS, you can do that.
Okay.
But the caveat is if you still have a valid I-20.
So you wanna make sure you maintain your F1 status at all times, if you're thinking of applying.
I was in Nepal during the very day that happened.
If you're on
I came back a week after that. So it was April 25, I got back in June, first week of June, right? And then this is started after 24th, June 24th. I can still apply if I want to.
You came back when?
First week of June.
Yeah, you were here since June 24th.
Yeah.
And just so you know, you have to maintain continuous presence, but you can have brief, visits elsewhere. They say brief, casual, innocent. How much time does that mean? Good question. I've seen in other statutes where they do talk about brief, casual, and innocent departures. This is for deportation purposes. More than 90 days is too much. But that's not necessarily this. I mean, because it doesn't specify here, I think it's going to be more discretionary.
I had a question about OPT again. So while in TPS and OPT, can I extend my esteemed OPT again for 17 months? Can I do that while being in TPS?
Are you working your, I mean, I would say yes,
Okay.
I believe.
Because I don't see a reason why I can't do that. Right.
Doesn't it have to
If you're
be a?
maintaining OPT,
Right.
Yeah, that's
Right?
the thing.
if you're still applying for extension. I would-
TPS doesn't stop me from extending my esteemed.
No, you
Yeah.
still
As long
extend
as
it,
you're
as long
following
as you're still working on
regulations to maintain OPT.
Because with OPT you get 27 months, with TPS you only get 18 months. So
Right, but that's for STEM.
Yeah.
Not everyone.
It's all, but you need to maintain your like 1 year OPT, status.
yeah, so given
So you
I
still get
don't
a
violate
job
any
in
of
your
the rules
field
of OPT,
and work.
I can do whatever I could have done.
And so
Yeah.
keep that TPS
Okay.
too.
You just keep acting like an F1, but you
Right.
have this
Yeah.
TPS on the
Just
side also.
focus, right, so then your focus is my main goal for you, my main status is the OPT,
Right.
EAD, and TPS is in the background. For others, because the TPS is bigger, is
Right.
longer, and they're not gonna maintain their status, they're gonna focus on TPS.
Right.
And maybe have the F1 in the background, maybe not.
Right.
Okay.
And that would be a case where you don't apply for EAD in TPS because you don't need one if you have from OPT, right?
I have a question. Can you be self-employed when you're on TPS?
When you're TPS,
Yeah.
yeah, you can.
So you can register for LLC? You can register for an LLC?
Yes. You can't self-sponsor H1B then.
You can't sponsor yourself.
I tried that.
Your own company can't
Because
sponsor.
on OPT, you can sponsor yourself on H1B. When you're on OPT and if you start a LLC, during that time.
I've actually tried these cases, they're exceptionally difficult. They are, and I say you can't, even though you can always try anything within immigration law, but they highly scrutinize that, and the trick is to show that it's a corporation. LLC is a pass-through, so I think that's trickier if it's an LLC, but if it's a C Corp, then you're not the owner, because as we know, C Corps are actually people.
One of the thing with payroll that you mentioned, if we get advanced payroll, we can go back to our country. Should that be an emergency case, or you can just go visit for a month, come back? Or?
You can go, in theory, you can do it for anything.
Okay.
I've had people go on advanced parole for adjustment of status, not TPS, to go visit Mexico.
Okay.
But they have to approve it. That's
Okay.
the key.
Because one of the things is you're saying you can't go back to your country because the situation is not favorable. That's why you're here and you have the TPS.
I know, weird, right?
Right, and then if you go for like Blizzard for a month, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm just thinking if that
But
violates.
there's a difference, and I'm gonna be the devil's advocate for your side. There's a difference between visiting family members and living
Right.
in that situation. In war-torn countries, in other countries, you might wanna, avoid it, but you might be safe going there for a week. But if, the terrorists see you there for more than a week, they're gonna say, that person is like perfect to extort. Because they're coming from the States, they're living in suffering, right?
Yeah.
So, it's, that would be my argument, but it's always up to them.
Okay.
On the application itself, it asks for reasons that you're traveling.
Mhm.
I try to be as benign as possible. I'm not gonna say, I'm gonna go take in the rays, take in some sun, eat some good food. No, I'm, visit family or something.
Okay.
I have another question. So once you have LLC registered over there and once TPS ends, is there any extension period for that so that people can get back? Is there any business side policy in immigration? Because your business is registered over here and it's running in full flow. The TPS ended.
There is no
You have
special.
no status.
No. Your status is what's gonna control you. So, if you can apply for a change of status based on your employment, your self-employment included, fantastic. But that's gonna be dependent on that. There's no other exception. Or, you get married or something. There's no if, you know, my business is still running, please let me stay here exception, if that's okay.
Okay, and my another question is, so once you are on H1B, working for some company, there's rule that you can still be self-employed, but you can only play a part-time role. You cannot be full-time in both companies. You can do like, you can be a chairman or like only do part-time and get like paid part-time. So once you have H1B and TPS, can you be full-time in both?
You might be violating your H-1B status at that point.
Yeah. that-
And then they might, if they look at it, because the question is, are they gonna figure out or not?
Yeah.
Then at that point, they might determine that you've abandoned your H-1B status because you violated that status. So you still have to think about which boat am I really gonna focus on, right? Am I gonna be focused on the TPS and, you know what, say I'm gonna work wherever I want to? Or are you gonna focus on your H-1B and say, you know what, TPS is just there in the background just in case, but I need to stay in H-1B status. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
I asked this because earlier you said that you can work 5 jobs.
That is if you focus on your TPS only.
Or that time you're.
Yeah. So that's, thank you for that clarification. There was confusion there because, yeah, if you're just doing your EAD on your TPS and forgetting everything else, that opens you up to working with whomever. But if you're gonna focus on that H-1B and have that TPS as a background, again, you wanna maintain that H-1B status. Okay.
I have one question about OPT. So let's say I have my OPT right now and then I apply for TPS and decide to work outside my field of study. And after December 2016, can I go back to OPT?
If you still have a valid I-20, but if you worked outside of your OPT, the argument is gonna be that, if they find out, that you worked outside of your field of study, so that might invalidate your I-20.
In that
Okay.
case, if
Can I,
it
like-
finds out-
Can I
Apply for a new F1.
Oh, okay.
So if you go back to school, if you say, you know what, I'm gonna do my master's now, or my PhD now, you can reapply for a new F1 and then start that all over again. So you don't have to focus on the old F1, just get a new I-20.
Or just new OPT, is that possible?
If your I-20 is still valid, because your OPT is
violate-
dependent on your I-20.
And there's a limit to time period when you can apply for OPT. So if you graduated 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And then did TPS and then come to us and say, now can I apply for OPT? It's too late because you have to apply for it within the 60 days after graduation at the latest.
That is a good piece to know.
There's so
actually.
many details.
I know.
But when I have my TPS and my status changes to something else, I can do that, right?
If
I
you
can
have your
go back.
TPS, you can change status to something else.
Okay.
But you should be abide by that status.
Right.
Say if you change to H1B, you should abide by whatever
If you
H1B.
plan to do that, because why? Because the H-1B can lead to lawful permanent residence. I mean, if you like this country, you want to stay here, you might not.
And TPS might end any time. You don't have-
Exactly.
Yeah, so.
And that doesn't lead to anything. You can't, based on that, apply for your green card. But on your H-1B, if the employer's awesome, they will.
So will it delay the citizenship application process or green card application process? If applying for TPS also, will it delay or something?
If you're applying for TPS, no, because let's say you're doing your H-1B and you are on TPS and they decide to do your green card and you win your green card, you're done. You don't need your TPS anymore. You've got your green card. You're a permanent resident now. Now, then at that point, you usually wait 5 years or depending upon the type of green card, 3 years to get your citizenship.
So it will not delay while both are in process?
Right.
Okay.
Other things that I want to make sure of that you guys understand and know, if you are arrested or convicted of 2 misdemeanors, you can't do this, TPS, okay? It's unlikely that this has happened because you all are on F1, but this is just 2 misdemeanors. It doesn't have any qualifications to it. It doesn't say it has to be a crime involving moral turpitude. It doesn't have to say it has to be an aggravated felony, blah, blah, blah. 2 misdemeanors. I assume that it's not gonna be traffic offenses because those are technically considered misdemeanors. But that didn't say anywhere I could find. So I'm expecting that it's just actual misdemeanors. And any other typical ground of inadmissibility. In other words, there's a whole list under 212A of the Immigration and Nationality Act, if you wanted to know, of reasons why immigration can say you are denied status. Also, 237 is another section you should look at. But they're specifically saying for TPS, look at 212, and it's crimes. So it could be certain crimes like theft offenses, anything that involves moral turpitude, or they consider like something fraudulent. Security-related grounds, terrorism, all that kind of stuff. Oddly enough, membership in a totalitarian party or communist party. If anyone's, and they also have Nazis. So if you're a Nazi, and I mean like 1945 Nazi, not like neo-Nazi. They still have it in the law. Isn't that crazy? Any material immigration misrepresentation. So let's say you come in the border and you said you're a U.S. citizen. Unlikely because you're all still here. But so if you have anything like that, and I would say any sort of arrest that's not traffic offense, I would say you should talk to a lawyer beforehand so we can look at that in particular, because bouncing a check has been found to be a crime involving moral turpitude. It's insane, even though you might not have that volition, but in certain circles it has. So you need to look at that and be sure. All right, you need to maintain continuous physical presence, of course. To go through.
And we'll prove that by showing our receipt from Walmart.
Continuous physical presence, yes. By showing any evidence of your physical presence here. I like using bank statements because you're using your card all the time. These days, you don't pay with cash. We just swipe the card. It's easy. That shows a continual history of where you've been in the United States. But yeah, anything that you can think of, phone records, even Facebook I've used. Kind of cool because it says, from this place. Just keep it PG. And so, show all the evidence that you need to back everything up that you're saying. I give, this is from immigration directly, suggestions on what that evidence could be. We can talk about this case in particular, more in a consultation. If you want the EAD with everything, it seems like it's going to be $515 in total. If you don't want the EAD, it seems like $135 in total. Apparently, you can also waive the filing fees. So you can look at Form 912 for that. I didn't actually write that down here, so I'm sorry, but it's 912. But it's in the TPS materials online. Make sure that you're always maintaining TPS. Every year, you're supposed to re-register. Again, keep looking at that website to see when the re-registration period is, and just take care of that. You don't have to pay for it all over again, but you do have to pay for renewal of the EAD. That's what you need to do. Travel, we've talked about that. Change of address, make sure you always maintain immigration aware of your current mailing address. And then we can talk about the questions in particular, which we might have touched on a few.
One more thing, like you said, we should apply for EAD and the TPS forms together, right?
Yes.
Or we don't have to apply for the travel document.
No.
Travel.
In fact, you will be rejected if you file the travel document right then, because the travel document is based on something that you already have, so you can't apply for it with that application.
You slightly touched on the matter. I have a related but a little different question.
Sure.
I actually got a mail from my international student advisor. She would say, and actually she sent one of the links and says, immigration relief measures for Nepalese nationals. And it says grant of free parole, expedited processing kind of thing. And one of the items says consideration for waivers of fees associated with USCIS benefit applications. What actually means? I mean, what does it mean, and how can it be done?
Are you talking about waiving the fees for
Yeah, it
this?
says consideration for waivers of fees associated with USCIS applications.
Yeah, so there are some applications in immigration that you can forgive the fees for. If you don't make enough money.
Right, okay.
Okay.
So basically, for example, suppose you are applying for, let's say, H-1B or green card, or suppose. So can it work there?
Only for certain applications. The H-1B is supposed to be sponsored by.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not going to waive those.
Right. For example,
adjustment of status.
Yeah.
Part of the requirement under Section 212 of the immigration law is that you not become a public charge. So you, in other words, that you're not gonna, draw on the welfare system, that you're not gonna become impoverished. In other words, that you have to have a sponsor who says, you know what, I'm gonna be there in case they need money, I'm gonna pay for them. Okay, so that's in general terms. So waiver of the fees is not gonna be for those types of applications. So you can't do it for, if you're getting your green card, you can't waive those fees. But they have said that for this TPS, you can apply to waive your fees.
just for TPS.
Just for TPS, they have other applications too, like the, victim-based stuff and other things, but for TPS, you can't. You can apply for it. They might say, no, you make too much money, make sure you pay your fees.
But for example, not for green card.
Not for the green card,
Just
because of
being a
the
Nepali
nature of the
citizen
green
and
card.
this are-
The green card requires that you have a financial sponsor if you can't afford it yourself. So,
Okay.
prove to us that you can pay for this,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Well, because these are the bullet points,
I know, and that's why it's good to have.
what is the explanation? I was just curious.
And the other caveat to that, it's funny because I say something and it's not always the case. Sometimes you can waive fees for employment for green card if it's based on the victim.
Mhm.
The only reason, but unusual. You'll know if you are. Okay, so in answering the questions, I want to make sure that I have a disclaimer. I know it's very lawyerly of me, but I pretend to be a lawyer often. I am answering these in general. I am not answering them particular to whomever asked the question because I need to make sure when I answer someone's question that I know their complete history that's pertinent to immigration law. So again, these are more general answers. So one question was, what happens to a recent graduated student who chooses TPS over OPT? What happens after the TPS expire? Can he or she go back to OPT or F1? And can someone's STEM be extended? And I think that we've answered that question, so it's gonna be dependent on which boat you choose. If you can go back to the F1 and then your OPT again, if that I-20 is still valid. You can, fortunately with the laws and the regulations, let's say you didn't continue that legal status, you only relied on the TPS, you can at that point adjust status or change status to something else. So you can have or apply for a new F1 I-20. You can decide to go back to school, or you can adjust status and say you've fallen in love, got married, or the H-1B, you can apply for adjustment of status. Okay, so that's
I still had a question regarding this. We already talked that we'll talk about how if you have TPS with EAD, if you have OPT with EAD, you don't have to apply EAD for TPS.
correct.
But what if the case is reversed? If you apply for TPS first and then you graduate, now do you apply for OPT?
That's gonna depend on if you independently could file for the OPT, right? So is your I-20 still valid? That's one question. Two, even if it's still valid, apparently you have to file for it within
60 days of graduation.
60 days of graduation.
Right, but the cost that the amount that you pay for OPT is for EAD, right? But you already have EAD from TPS, so.
It's a different EAD. You couldn't say, now I'm gonna start using this EAD for my OPT. You actually have to apply for OPT. There's an I-20 thing involved.
Okay.
So it sounds like the example you're sharing, you would still be in valid F1 status,
Mhm.
even though you have this TPS thing. So then you would go ahead and apply for OPT just like any other F1 student
Okay.
and pay the $380 and fill out the same form that you filled out for the other EAD.
Okay. Well, that applies exactly for me because I'm graduating this December, so I can apply TPS now, and once I graduate, I can apply OPT.
Correct.
So that would be the ideal way I should go, right? Have
Yeah.
TPS, apply OPT, do whatever you do in general case, but just keep TPS in your.
If you want, that's what you
Okay.
want to do, yeah.
Okay.
I think it's good. There might be some situations where people get two EADs, one for TPS, one for the OPT, and then you decide to use one or the other. Know that, keep them straight because they actually have codes on them that say upon what basis you have that EAD.
Okay.
So just know which one is valid because one is gonna expire before the other, most likely.
Right.
So know which one you need to renew.
No, I was just asking that because, for example, I apply TPS and I say I don't want EAD now, but after a few months, I apply OPT and I say, I want EAD again.
Right.
So I was just wondering if that doesn't go with, what I said before, if that doesn't match. Like you didn't want EAD a few months back and now you're asking for EAD.
Right.
So that wouldn't be the case, right? I can still apply for
You can still apply.
Okay.
So what if a person gets employment with OPT and then later decide, oh, I'm going to continue this employment, but I'm going to use the EAD? Is that possible?
The EAD through the TPS?
So a person just starts working on his OPT and then later decides, okay, I'm just going to use EAD but continue the employment. Is that possible?
Yeah, so if you got the OPT, the EAD for the OPT, you're using that, and then when that OPT expires, you say, I want to continue working, and you have to apply for the EAD through the TPS. Yes, you could do that.
Can you apply H1B from your TPS EAD? Can you
Yes.
still- Okay.
Yes. Because again, you've got that TPS, that allows you to change status.
So you can still apply H1B.
So if you would like to suggest, you would say that there's no harm in getting TPS for students like us, because I don't see anywhere where getting TPS would harm me. in
Coming
any ways,
away, right.
Coming away,
That's my
right?
sentiment as well.
Well, and the day when TPS ends, I will still have either H1 or F1 OPT.
You can apply for that, or you've already have it, yeah.
So for a student like us, TPS wouldn't come in our way in any way.
I don't believe it will, but you need to make sure that you're maintaining your status. If you're picking the H-1B route, that you stick with the H-1B route and keep the OPT in your back pocket.
In relation to that, if I have H1B and TPS too, if I want to travel, when I come back in the guy at the airport, immigration, right? Will he say, oh, you have TPS, but
That's a good question.
you didn't have any permission?
I
But
wonder if you would know.
I don't think you would know. I
Especially if
think,
you have an I-20. Oh, wait, you don't have an I-20.
no, you'd
No,
have,
I'll
you
have my
have the
H-1B.
visa stamp in your passport. Have you gotten the visa stamp in your passport already?
yeah,
Okay, so you've already traveled back to Nepal and gotten that.
Right when the earthquake happened.
That's-
I was there for 2 weeks. So I could show him that my visa or my H1B visa, right? Then I would be fine. And he
And
would say,
don't
oh,
mention the TPS.
TPS, yeah, TPS, like, where's your parole, like, travel parole?
I don't know what would happen exactly in that situation. I think it's gonna depend on the person seeing you, because unfortunately, they are not lawyers.
Mhm.
Some of them have a high school degree, some of them don't even have that. And they're trained, so they go by what their book says, sometimes blindly, and sometimes maybe they misinterpret things. Some of them are very savvy and very intelligent and know what they're doing. But I think that I would argue your visa is your ticket inside, is your key into the gate of the United States. And that should be enough to allow you entry. I think that, I wonder if they would ever argue that you abandoned your TPS status because you didn't ask for advanced parole. I would argue that you didn't because you didn't need advanced parole and you still maintained your TPS that way. Because it's not like you leave the country and your TPS suddenly disappears, it's, can you come back in?
Yeah, but your passport will have the new I-94, and
I know,
later,
with the H-1B.
yeah, and later when they check your documents, they'll be like, hey, you traveled to Nepal this time, but you don't have any advanced parole document with us.
I'd have to look into that. I'd have to see what has happened. I'd have to look into the law and see if there's anything on that question. But it's an interesting question, and I could make arguments for anything, but what are they gonna do?
Right.
And is there
Like,
someone with
when they
this
look
kind of
my
relevant
social security or my
experience?
visa on their computer, what will show up?
Yeah.
Will my H1 show up or my TPS show up?
Yeah, and it's likely that they won't look at all of that necessarily.
Mhm.
That seems more like a secondary inspection question.
Right.
They might just look at your visa, it looks valid, it looks good, all right, next person.
Yeah.
You know,
If they do a
it's,
deeper search,
if they do
then
a deeper search, then there could be questions, so, and I want you guys to know and realize that TPS has often been granted for countries where individuals are already here without documentation. So a lot of the experience, the relevant experience has been people who are undocumented. And so if you had any undocumented periods in your history, you have to get authorization to come back in again. So this is a different question that I've not encountered, so thank you.
On the same note, it mentions here that you can't bring your spouse just being in TPS, but he still has like his S1B. Can you go back and twice while on TPS?
Or to find a love?
She was looking out for you.
Can you see that?
Well, an H1B does have dependents.
Right.
And now they can work, just gotta go H4s.
Yeah.
So you can, based on the H1B, do it. Whether you've been in your TPS is the same question as before.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that doesn't come in the way.
Because it's if you come in and you leave, or if you leave and come in without the advanced parole document, and you come in legitimately, is it gonna affect your TPS? I'm
Yeah.
thinking not, but I'm not sure, so that's something I have to look up, get back to you. H1B, TPS, leave, no advanced parole.
Some of you, it sounds like you really don't need TPS. It might be a nice thing to have in the background just in case something
Yeah,
falls
right,
apart.
right. Yeah.
Exactly.
But it really sounds like some of you, like you were talking about, your OPT is most likely gonna last quite a bit longer
Right.
than this TPS unless it's extended.
But the other
But in
thing
your
is,
case, if your employer's applying for permanent residency,
yeah, in reference to history, I mean, for Haiti, it has been extended for 10 years.
it's true.
So my OPT would only last so much, like 27 months. Like thrice or twice even, I benefit more from TPS.
Exactly, and you don't wanna lose that because we
Right.
don't know if there's gonna be a late registration
Right.
Yeah,
or not.
Right.
it's true.
There's nothing there.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't hurt you to do both.
Yeah, right. So that is one of the things I wanted to confirm. Will that hurt me in any way? If not, I mean, parents here is not
Because it's not a legal status, I would say it doesn't.
Okay. So in my case, would you suggest me to get OPT first and then TPS, or TPS first and then OPT?
There's a timeline that's all very similar for you.
Yeah.
Because we usually have students apply for OPT at the beginning of their final semester because it takes the government 3 months to process that form. So for students who think they want to start working as soon as they graduate, well, you're going to be applying for OPT in September.
Right.
And the deadline right now for TPS is December.
Right.
So it's all going to come together around the same time. I think it depends on when you think you want to start working. Actually, if you want to start working soon, apply for TPS now, because then in the fall, you could legally work and we can't say you're not allowed to work
Right.
because you have this other thing.
The thing is, I still wanted to work from my OPT and just get my TPS in the back pocket. So looks like I'll apply for OPT and then apply for TPS in November or something.
I think
Oh,
that's
you
a
should
good
join
plan.
our-
Did you find processing times?
I can look it up, I don't know.
त्यसलाई रिक्वायरमेन्ट भनेको जुन
I found like 3 months or something for this as well on various
It's funny,
websites.
that's usually
So
what it's
Nepal
about, 3 to 6 months.
But how long did it take? to
I
process?
looked into AVO, the website for legal consultation, GBPO.
Uh-huh.
And all the answers that they give is like all negative. They say you can't get back F1.
त्यसो
You
भए
can't
अब
get back
सपोज
to F1. There's
मेरो
no need of
मम्मी
like,
Yeah.
I mean, they're a different teacher.
I can tell you,
Found.
I can point you the regulations that say you can change status.
Okay.
And again, it's gonna be particular because if someone isn't documented, they can't necessarily change status because they've never maintained it. So they have this other impediment.
Right.
Whereas your case is different and
continuous
typical
physical
case,
presence in use
they're
since
undocumented. So, it's always like, they make fun of attorneys, because our answer is always, it depends.
I say.
I did wanna talk about the 90-day, someone said that they're confused about the 90-day travel permit, and that, is it 90 days of travel per year or 90 days for the entire duration of my TPS? The 90-day rule is not in the law, okay? So, you can travel abroad, you can ask for permission to travel and ask for a certain time period, or you can say indefinite. I usually don't give a time period, I usually say indefinite, unknown, or whatever. And then they'll give you a certain time frame, okay? You can travel within that time frame. Don't come back, don't leave and then not come back, when after the expiration of that time frame. Obviously, in emergency situations, you go to the consulate and you'll, get things that, changed. But, there have been reports from attorneys that say that, and I'll get to you in a second, that they traveled with the advanced parole document and they stayed for, it was 90 days in this case. It was in China. And they came back into the country after the 90 days, but within the time frame that this advanced parole was valid. And the person coming in the border said, no, you can't come in, you're over 90 days. And unfortunately, that individual didn't have their lawyer with them because we're not allowed to be there at that first point of inspection. And so they returned back. But there is nothing in the rules and regulations that say you can't leave for over 90 days. And yet this officer said, well, 90 days is in our guidebook. What guidebook? There is no, I don't know if that person was, smoking something or what it was that caused them to say 90 days. But it wasn't the only case where someone has claimed 90 days. So it's unfortunate. Sometimes there are kind of policies that people follow that aren't mentioned to the public. So really under the law, they can always make that determination that we think you've abandoned your status because you've left for too long. But there's nothing in the law that says 90 days is the cutoff date. That being said, we can try to argue it, but that one person holds the key to your entry. So I suggest keeping the travel short, because you don't want to be that one person that meets that guy, or whomever it was. I'm sure there were various people. Okay, so
on that travel document, it asks you when do you want to leave, and then you pick a date, right? Do you have to leave on that date, or?
no, I usually don't pick a date. I say undetermined or within the next few weeks or months or whatever.
Okay.
That's what you don't know. So that's my experience. I just, okay, then fine.
Good to know that.
So thanks to the live streaming, one of our friends just sent a question from Texas. And his question is like, can you apply TPS EAD once OPT EAD ends in March? I think you have answered it, but just for
Say
reconfirmation.
that again. Say that
Can you apply TPS EAD once OPT EAD ends in March? Suppose he's working in, right? Once your OPT EAD ends, you can still apply for TPS EAD.
That's the benefit.
Provided you apply for EAD in the beginning.
In the beginning.
Yeah, provided that you save that spot, you're in TPS.
Oh, sorry, I got confused on this one. So we have to apply for EAD now to be able to go back to OPD and back to EAD?
Yes, it's kind of like you don't have to pay for it, you don't have to get it,
Oh, we didn't have to pay, but
File the
maybe
form.
I would want it later sometime.
you just file the form.
Yeah, file the form. It says in the instructions, don't check off the boxes. There are boxes that say, I'm applying for a new EAD, I'm renewing, or I've lost my EAD. Those are the 3 boxes. Don't check any of those, because you don't want it, but fill out the rest.
I
And
think
in
there
your
is.
cover letter, say, I always like a cover letter, it organizes things. I don't know if they look at it or not. I've had it where they do, so just say, I am not paying for it, or I do not want an EAD, but here's the form.
I think there is one box that says I don't want it, but I'm just applying with my 821 form. I think there is a box like that.
I am not, I probably don't.
I
Maybe
maybe I'm
able to fill out
confused.
forms for me these days, which is really nice. So I don't fill them out anymore. I just review them. So I might skip over that.
Interns working for it.
Paralegals, so nice to have. Let's see. How easy is it to transition from TPS to F1, H1? As easy as it usually is, because it's not always easy to get an H1B or to get other statuses, but because the law says that you can change status and adjust status, so long as you independently, again, could change statuses, you can. So if you had a crime before, or if you had unlawful presence before, you might have issues in, after getting your TPS, adjusting or changing status. Again, if you want to make that jump, I always suggest a consultation with an attorney. And we talked about them marrying an individual.
He can bring his wife in H1 and TPS.
Yeah.
He's just asking for himself.
Yeah.
Do you have a wife?
No.
Not yet.
Not yet. The last part of that one I wasn't sure. It says, okay, so the first part is, can you bring someone over, blah, blah, but then it says, what if the person that you're marrying is a permanent resident? Obviously they already have status, so maybe I was misunderstanding the question. If you're marrying a permanent resident,
What will be your status?
Oh, if they're nice enough to petition for you, then you can adjust status to permanent residence, and you don't need an TPS because you're a permanent resident of the United States.
So is there a way where when you say I don't need TPS anymore, or you just
No, by automatic operation of law, once you get an immigrant visa, which is the permanent residence,
Oh,
TPS is no longer needed.
okay?
Now,
that's good to know.
There's an interesting question there that I just thought of. What if, and I don't expect you're gonna do this, but I shouldn't even say anything, thank you guys. Anyway, if you are a permanent resident, okay, so let's say you have a TPS, then you're a permanent resident, and then you get into trouble. You get arrested for domestic violence, and you're in danger of losing your permanent residence. You go to immigration court, and yeah, you've lost it. Can you then get TPS again? I don't know. I pose these questions, but then I don't know. I'm making something.
I hope not, because
At that-
they're committing domestic violence
Yeah.
crimes.
Right.
That's the check over $1,000. That's an aggravated felony. So at that point, gosh, go see an attorney at that point. And I swear to you, I will look things up for you.
I think at that point, both would be invalid because you already crossed the lines from both TPS and. permanent residence.
Touche. Touche. I'm making
I should be a
more,
lawyer. No.
I'm making it more complicated.
But while in H1, is there a way you say I don't want TPS anymore?
Once you're in H1, just don't renew it. Just don't, because
Okay.
there are re-registration periods, just don't renew it. If you just said, you know what, I don't care anymore.
Do you re-register once a year?
They'll announce it when you have to re-register. And of course, when your EAD expires, you should have re-registered by then. Any other questions for me regarding TPS?
Well, there have been like thousands of posts in internet if you search, and people like all the lawyers, they kind of answer all the questions, but I've never seen if this video goes into internet, this will be so viral.
I've not made it public, but this will be recorded, and you can forward the link to
Do you
anyone.
have
And they'll
permission?
that's where.
Yeah, I get permission.
Okay, that's on video now.
With a caveat that everything I've said is general information. Obviously, it doesn't pertain to the individual. In particular, that individual should always go see an immigration lawyer to make sure that their case is